My name's Dave Zwang. I'm the chairman of the Ghent Workgroup, and with me today is Vyncke from Hybrid Software, who is one of the members of the Ghent Workgroup. And we're going to present a session today on PDF creation and workflow strategies. And of course, in today's environment, those are very important, two very important topics, and very much near and dear to what we do at the Ghent Workgroup. So first of all, for those of you who are not aware of who the Ghent Workgroup is, we're basically an international organization. We've got graphic art users, associations, developers, universities, and we're pretty much a cross-section of the international graphic arts communities. In all being humble, I'm going to say best minds, but we actually are. There's some pretty sharp people who come to the Ghent Workgroup and look forward to actually including others as well as we continue to move on and get into new things. Our members are educators, again, users, educators, hardware and software vendors, and graphic arts associations from all over the globe. We are very much an international group. This is, you can see from here, it's kind of a who's who in terms of our vendor members. Our educational members, as you can see, we've got a number of universities, again, from around the globe. Our association members, these are, again, from around the globe, and from different types of associations as well, who focus in different areas, but all around, centering around graphic arts. And industry members, sometimes the industry members are members of associations, but they feel that they need their own voice to help and participate, which is great. We welcome that. We get involved in a lot of different kinds of things. As you can see, these are the various subcommittees that we currently have. Most of them are active. Some of them may not be active, like our office document printing. We feel that for the time being, what we've already accomplished and put out there for the industry to digest, read, etc., hasn't changed enough for us to jump back in again, but we will as we need to, and we do this on a regular basis. We'll talk a little bit in a little while about some of the things that we do have and how you as industry members, whether you're a member of the Ghent Workgroup or you're just someone who's interested and do this for a living, in working graphic arts and publishing, packaging, commercial print, etc., how you can gain access, and it's gain access to all this information that we put together, and it's all free, so it's pretty straightforward and very easy to get involved with. Our mission is to develop and maintain process specifications. Basically, what we do is we create best practices for graphic arts workflows. We're very much in a global environment now. People are constantly sending files across state lines, country lines, and at a rate for production that seems to be turning faster and faster and faster. So having best practices, having both tools to make things easier and more effective, and having best practices so you can meet your customers' expectations is significant. So this is really what we focus on. Again, we want everybody in the industry to be successful. So we have workflow tools. We've developed ways to streamline production tasks. We create these specifications which are downloadable. We share best practices, and we basically develop a lot of industry solutions, some of which you'll hear about today during the discussion we're having. But don't forget, we have a lot of other webinars in this series, so some that we've already done and some that will be upcoming. So feel free to go to gwg.org and look at what we have and access that information. The deliverables, if you will, are specifications, which basically are, in many cases, for the end user, are setting files for applications used, like InDesign, Quark, if you're in the design environment, or settings tools for various DFEs, whether you're working with EFI or Rico or Heidelberg or oh gosh, the list goes on. We pretty much cover we cover the waterfront, as they say, in terms of specifications, all very much available and downloadable, so that you can be sure what you are and how you are setting up your software and your DFEs for your printers, that they are in the best possible setup for meeting expectations. We have test suites to ensure that, and we'll talk about those a little later on, as well as application settings. And we also do some job ticketing, because we're very much believers in the fact that automation is the key to workflows as we move forward as an industry. So one of the things, and one of the reasons that we tend to focus on that, is because you know, if you look at where people believe they need to focus their efforts, and this was ID Alliance did an investment report a couple of years ago. Actually, it was toward the end of 2017, but things haven't really changed that much. One of the most important focuses that people are looking at is a more efficient workflow. And you can see that increasing automation, more efficient workflow, getting faster to deal with turn times, all of these things that are affecting you out there on a daily basis are the areas that we are focusing on as well. And we believe that process automation is, in fact, one of the major factors that is driving the new economy. Why is that? Well, ultimately, if you're efficient, it's going to grow margins. The margins and the shipments will be less expensive to produce. You can see here, this is a study that was done by the U.S. Department of Commerce that shows over the course from 1992 through, in this case, 2015, you can see that the adjusted shipments per employee, because in some cases, one of the measures that people have a tendency to use to talk about efficiencies, or how efficient, if you will, a company is to take the number of employees and divide it into how many, what is their annual turnover. And you can see in 1992 it was about $175 per employee, and it now is up close. Actually, I'm sure that it's just about reached $200 per employee at this point. So you can see that the automation and efficiency that we're all being able to work with as a result of some of the work we're doing, but also the tools are changing, and that's allowing that to happen. One of the things that and this is something that I tell all of my customers, because I work a lot with customers around the globe, on how they should and how they can optimize their processes and build an infrastructure that will allow them to support future growth in addition to current growth. This was a chart that we put together as part of a program I worked with InfoTrends to create this transformative workflow strategy study. And what it really does is it shows you the way you should be thinking about how you create workflows and how you look at workflows within your business. And you can see it's broken up into a number of different strata. At the bottom is pretty much production, right? So you look at it and you have your content and input, the content submission, processing it, output, and delivery. But as we all know, that there's a lot more that goes around that. As we start to get much more managed and optimized, and as our tools allow us to, we start to integrate that production with a management functionality that includes scheduling, controlling, tracking, reporting, etc. And of course, if we look at that, on top of that, there's a business section too, because the reality is that when somebody sends you a file to produce, there's usually business interests that are a part of that that file submission. There's costs, there's inventory, there's management of assets, management of personnel and of customers, response campaigns, etc. And all of that increasingly, if you just look at even those 3 layers, the first 3 layers from the bottom up, those are very much a part of what most service providers, agencies, converters are dealing with today on a regular basis. But the reality is that you're not dealing with it and dealing with these issues in a vacuum, because all of you have customers and you have suppliers and partners. And increasingly, there is a need to interact with those customers and those suppliers, and to do it in a very automated fashion, where instead of just picking up the phone or constantly sending back emails to check status or to place orders, etc., we're starting to do this more and more, and we're requiring more and more, and our customers are requiring more and more, and our partners and suppliers are requiring more and more. This interaction of data and this exchange of data, EDI, electronic data information and interchange, is becoming just a normal part of what we do, whether it's something like web to print, or it's something like just a straight EDI feed from one of your customers' businesses and their business systems to your business system, and perhaps even back again. This is more about what we're doing and how we are looking at, both in the Ghent Workgroup, but how we as an industry need to look at how things are done. And we're starting to see this not just in our industry, we're seeing it in a lot of industries. And I'm sure you all have that, because, you know, it's interesting. If I were to look at the customers or your partners and suppliers, they actually have many of these strata that we have: process management, business information, production. They have the same type of systems in their facilities that's actually driving their facilities. So they want to be able to actually integrate what they're doing with what you're doing. And you need to do the same thing, because that's going to make us all much more efficient and allow us to operate in a much more efficient and timely manner. So as I said, this is in my estimation, this should be hanging on your wall. Okay.
Yeah, so why in this story that Dave just told you is PDF important? Because one of the things we just already mentioned is that you have all this data flying around, and the better your data is, the faster you will process, or the less communication you have around it to make it actually work. So the first thing you need to do, if you have to have it, or if you want an efficient workflow, is to get your data that you need to produce correctly at your facility. And in the old days, with native file formats, you had problems with fonts, with images, versions of native applications and stuff. And this is all solved by using PDF. PDF, in the one hand, it's a well-documented document container, so everything, your graphics are in there. Well, that's basically its functionality, to contain your graphical data. The fact that it's still object-oriented allows you still at any point to have high-quality output, or to make last-minute edits if you need to. It's easy to work with, because there are a lot of tools that understand the format and that are made to produce it, or to edit it, or to look at it. You have the options to embed the images or to keep them external for fonts. So you do still have the choice to tweak your your exchanged files in the way you want to have them. On the other hand, it also maintains a division of responsibility, and with that we mean that in the old days, part of your work was to actually make sure that if you reopen the file, it's opened correctly, meaning if it's an Illustrator, you have to have the correct version, or you had text reflows and all that kind of little tweaks that were important to make it work. Now, if the file is produced and delivered correctly, it does open correct. On the other hand, if there are still last-minute requests to make a text edit or anything, you are still able to do that, but then you clearly know which part of the task was from the producer and which was from the consumer. So it's clearly which part has where the responsibility lies. And finally, as said before, there is a full ecosystem around it. You have all the tools like Quark, InDesign, Illustrator, they all generate your PDF. You have your PDF workflow tools in Acrobat or other server-based like InFocus, Switch. You have your PDF rips like the Adobe Imaging Engine or the Global Graphics rip. So all of these tools in the prepress area, they fully support PDF. So it's actually quite of a no-brainer. This is the format that everybody understands, can consume and produce. So it's a good base to work on. But PDF in itself was designed initially by Adobe 25 years ago to be a multi-purpose container, primarily for printing and viewing, and it does also contain support for interactive forms, so it does a lot more than just printing. Now, if you would say that PDF in itself is enough to do a successful interchange and successful printing, well, that's probably not just going to work. And that's why there are additional layers of standards on top of it to tweak PDF to just do what we need in our arena. And that's what PDFX stands for. It's actually an exchange format for printing files. So at the bottom layer, we have what Adobe starts. It's the ISO specification. It's been recently reviewed, so it's a good standard to build on. On top of that, PDFX was developed to restrict the content to more print-oriented workflows. In general, we can say that font and images need to be embedded. You need to have correct defined page boxes so that you know which part is meant to be printed, which part is just informational. And you are not allowed to use interactive content like video, sound. And so in the end, a PDFX file is a general purpose print file. The GWG specifications we make on top of that restrict further what you can use. In a way, they try to capture limitations which are related towards printing and production processes. For example, we also specify what your minimal line width can be if you use sheet offset or another process, whether you can use spot colors. And for example, if you do magazine printing, you probably cannot use process spot colors. For ads in newspapers, it's typically black and white. So we do have multiple standards for a specific process use case, which then limits what PDFX can contain further for that specific process. If you finally on top want to further restrict that for things which are specific to your company, you can do that, of course, and it's simple to continue or to further restrict against workgroup profiles. But of course, there is also the other side. If you just say to your to the people that send you files, well, just use that Ghent workgroup profile and make sure your files adhere to this format. It's a very easy way to communicate, even more because most of those profiles are included in your prepress packages you can just buy off the shelf. Yeah. Now, of course, we just said what PDFX was, and this also needs to be incorporated in the way you build your day-to-day work as a file producer, you have to build your work around this concept. So you will typically, like if you're in commercial, you will typically create your art in Photoshop and or Illustrator. You save them in a native format and by preference media neutral. You combine all your elements in InDesign and Quark Express, and from there you can export your PDFX files and even include them with, even already apply the Ghent Workgroup profiles, and then to get a correct PDFX file you can send to your customer. Similar if you're in a packaging workspace, you do your image in Photoshop, you combine all your work in Illustrator. From there, you can export to PDFX. And finally, you will need to use Acrobat or another automated workflow tool to finally apply your Ghent Workgroup profile on it. But basically, there is a very well-defined way to produce correct files that you can later on send to your print producer in a successful manner if you follow these rules. Finally, so one of the points which is also important today is to try and focus more on media neutral files, because in today's world there are so many print processes. They have different gamuts. We are going to extended gamut printing, everything. So it's very, very hard to know in these days what your file will be printed on. It's not even realistic to try and to do so. So if you want to prepare your file for future reuse, it's actually important to make it media neutral. For example, if you say that your design is made in Grackle and you store all your images in your original white gamut that comes from your digital camera, you can later on convert it on the press to the correct gamut for that press without already restricting upfront to anything which is losing quality. You cannot recreate gamut which is lost. So that's important. That's why you should make media neutral files when possible.
So one of the things that, as Frank was explaining, when we created these specifications, that what we're calling the PDFX Plus specifications, which is kind of a refining, if you will, of just straight PDFX, because PDFX assumes that all of the different print conditions are the same, when we know, in fact, that the requirements for newspaper printing are probably going to be very different than they are going to be for wide format printing, or for office documents, or for packaging, etc. So what we've done is we've actually created individual specifications for each of these different types of applications: newsprint, web offset printing, sheet offset printing, silkscreen, as you can see, wide format, office documents, packaging, and these are very specific to the requirements of those applications. And as Frank mentioned, you can also then, should you need to, take those, use them as a starting point, and then further tweak them should you need to in your specific environment with your specific requirements. As we mentioned before, we actually have application settings for most of the applications that you're going to see they're probably sitting on your computers now, whether it's the Adobe Creative Cloud, InDesign, Acrobat, Photoshop, etc. We have export settings for those. We actually even have setting files, not just for export, but also should you need them so that you're working in an environment that makes sense for you as in your role in this process. We have setting files for the fiery rips, for the InFocus tools, for Callus PDF Toolbox, and you can see Quark Express, etc. So you can see that we pretty much tried to cover what is out there in the marketplace. In many cases, because our members are represented here, and they make sure that that in fact happens. We talk about pre-flight software, which is an integral part of any kind of workflow, because you know the last thing you want to do is find that you have a problem with your printed job on the press. Absolutely the wrong place to do it. You want to actually understand that there's a problem up front, and make sure that in fact that problem is prevented. So there's a number of ways to do that. In one case, as I said earlier, if you have this these tools, that the setting files, you can make sure that or ensure that the files you're creating, the PDF files you're creating, are created within a specification. Once to validate that in fact that's the case, you can use Preflight software. In this slide here, you can see on the upper left is Callus PDF Toolbox. In the lower right is In Focus Pit Stop. But basically they do the same thing. They actually look at the PDF file that's created, or the PDFX file that's been created, look at them against the specifications that the Ghent Workgroup has created, and lets you know if there is an error, which would be an X, or a warning, which would be a triangle with an exclamation point that would tell you there's a warning. And you can build your workflows, whether they're manual or they're automated, to use that information to facilitate kind of optimizing your workflow. Preflight is critical, and it should be used by the people who are creating the files, but even more importantly by the people who are receiving the files for production, to ensure, as I said, that you don't wind up with seeing the error but seeing it on the press.
Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking, Dave, about what you said, that it needs to be handled on both sides, but it's indeed true, because you need to catch your errors as soon as possible. So also, if you're just generating the files, pre-flight it as soon as possible, so that you can do your own corrections without having to go back and forth to your print provider. But also, as a print, if you receive the files, if it's not because they say it's compliant to some profile that it's truly like that. So rechecking it really doesn't hurt, and gives you the ability to react quicker on stuff which is not correct. Now, we see here a funky screenshot of something you might want to print, and this thing is, do you know your workflow, whether it's really working correctly? Because if you leave it up to a human, that one will always want to print the right image, which looks very natural. But you never know that your designer actually meant to print the left side, which is because she was having friendships with an alien and turned blue or something like that. So it's not because an operator thinks that something looks good that it is really good. So it's really important that you test your workflow, and that you know it works reliable, so that you can blindly accept files that comply to a certain standard. That's why the GW, the Ghent Workgroup, actually developed the Ghent PDF Output Suite, which currently is at version 5, which is meant to actually check whether your complete workflow, and with the term workflow, we mean more than just the workflow software, but it's your workflow in general, which goes from your input towards your final output, whether that is working correctly. So typically, it means you receive a file, and first of all, you might want to proof it. So by using the output suite, you can check whether your proofing setup works correctly. It can include online proofing, because you might have made edits, or just by looking at the incoming file, and you want to know whether your online proofing tool is rendering the output correctly and works correctly on handheld devices or your favorite web browser. And in the end, of course, you want to know your printing, whether it's working correctly. That is you're generating the correct output, the correct separations for your output device. So what did we do in the suite? It's actually, we are testing some critical features that are known to be problematic. And problematic is a combination of the fact that overprint and transparencies have a long growing period. And in all the software, some of these things were not handled correctly. Well, you might also have software with a bug here and there. Or you might have built custom workflows that do special tricks, and as such, in those tricks, do something which is not good if you want to do blind exchange. Or in some cases, you have to turn options on and off in your software for certain customers that do want to have certain behaviors. So with this output suite, you can actually tune at least part of your workflow, the one that you want to be covered with blind exchange, to work correctly against the output suite. We also have included there ICC patches to test your color management software, which is part of this thing. We tried actually to build the suite in a simple, well, a very simple way, or simple to interpret it, meaning if you look at the output, you should immediately be able to tell whether it's good or bad. Perhaps not to know why it's good or bad, but at least to know whether it's good or bad. For example, the top level patch, there is a clear text underneath which says that you should see a soft edge, a soft mask around your purple object. And so if everything is working correctly, you see the left result where the two sides are the same. When it's not working correctly, you see a clear difference between the left and right part of the patch. A second type of patches, as you see on the bottom, we have there rectangles, which we coded special in such a way that if your software is working correctly, they look like an even color sphere. Okay, there might be little artifacts in it, but if it's working incorrectly, you will see a clear cross around them. And you will know, okay, for this feature, in this case, it's testing blend modus, and you will see underneath each of the patches with blend mode is working or not working. And finally, to make your life, well, to make this test even simpler, we tried to put as many of those patches on a few pages. So in the end, if you want to test the full Ghent output suite, you have to produce 4 pages or 3 output pages and look at them. And that's enough to decide whether your workflow is working, yes or no. In this case, we tested the workflow, and in the workflow, it's very simple. It's open your incoming file into your favorite PDF viewer. And if you use Acrobat X, you will see that all the patches work correctly. While if you're using Apple Viewer, there is a lot of stuff which is not completely like it should be. That means that your Apple Viewer is actually fine for looking at Office documents or your day-to-day just simple work. But if you want to look at it to evaluate your incoming PDF files in your pre-press production workflow, it's not the right tool to use.
Thanks, Frank. And you know, so you can begin to see that what we've tried to do is we've tried to look at the entire process. Interestingly enough, the Ghent output suite was created because as we were creating these specifications and we were putting them into the field and people were using them, they're saying, well, I'm using your specifications, but I'm seeing these problems. And that's when we realized that we need to have another way to validate it. And that's why we created the Ghent output the Ghent output suite. It's a tremendous set of tools. But we've done a lot of other things as well. You know, we were founded in 2002 to create best practices. And we actually in 2003 said, you know, one of the areas that we know is ripe for digital manufacturing and production is going to be packaging. So what we did is in 2003, we started looking at that. We started looking at the market to see what, in fact, are we going to need to do to be able to address packaging? Because ultimately, if you can address packaging, the chances are you could probably address commercial, et cetera, but because the requirements for packaging are significant. both in terms of the follow-on processing with converting, as well as a lot of the color specifications, as color requirements, etc. And we started working with a lot of brand owners in the U.S. and in Europe to look at packaging, and actually started developing. We found that there were a lot of issues, core issues that we had to work with, but in the interim, we felt that we could still offer some value by introducing some specifications, which we did through 2015, and that helped us at least get people ready for the next set of challenges. The big challenges we found had to do with a number of things. It had to do with how do we communicate color information aside from CMYK and what we now what are called name colors spaces, or name colors, which are kind of like the Pantone colors, etc. But how do, if I wanted to, for example, use a spectral value, which is used regularly in a lot of packaging applications, how would I use that and communicate that information? And we worked with standards bodies, because we do that at the Ghent Work. We work also with a lot of ISO committees. As a matter of fact, a lot of the people in the Ghent Work Group also sit on those committees. But we found color was a big issue. We found that just the structure of PDF, how can we communicate this within PDF itself, was a problem, especially since PDF really hadn't been updated. It says here 2008, but it really hadn't been updated until 2007, since 2007. And we'll talk a little bit later about what's happened since, and there's some good news ahead. And then ICC Max, which is another way to look at tying together some of the various color specifications into PDFX, so we can begin to use it for a lot of other things beyond just and go beyond the limitations that exist today. One of the things we did, and this really has to do not just with packaging, it is packaging, but normally when you look at a PDF file, and if you're in packaging, or even if you're not in packaging and you're actually in commercial print, but you have you have to create some finishing, some processing steps that go beyond just the print, whether it could be die cutting, or it could be embossing, or it could be foil stamping, or it could be implementing Braille, for example. In a lot of countries, that's very important right now, because it's actually part of the regulations for certain types of packaging. So if we start looking at that, how do you communicate that information and communicate it in a standardized way, taking into account the fact that that it may be called something different depending on the languages you're working with. So that while we may call it a die outline in the States, they may call it a cutting thing somewhere else, or they may call it have a different name for it in another country. But how do we do that in a way where we can communicate that information into the PDFX file so that we can automate the process? Because you take a look at a lot of the equipment and solutions that are in the market today, and more importantly, what we can begin to expect to see at Drupa next year. And we start looking at these complete end-to-end solutions, like the MGI AlphaJet, which will actually print, die cut, emboss. It'll do all of these various steps, all in one pass. How do you communicate that in a reliable and efficient way so that we can have these blind exchanges? And we determined that what we needed to do was create processing steps that would actually allow us to control or contain the metadata and put it within the PDF file itself. But as I said, a lot of it really has to do with trying to make and automate a lot of the processes that we have. And as I had mentioned earlier, probably one of the bigger hurdles that most printers and converters and prepress houses have is great. We can get the file in, and maybe it is coming in it's coming in EDI, or it's coming in on an email, etc., or it's coming in web to print. But we need to have a way to be able to do that and capture all of the order and production data without the need for rekeying. Ultimately, because, as I said, if you hang that diagram that I showed you earlier on the wall, it really has to do with process connectivity. And you know, as an industry, we started to realize that going way back to SIP3, which was, okay, how do I look at a plate that's being processed, a printing plate, an offset plate that's being processed? How do I read that and help use it to set the ink keys on the press? What a concept, right? And then we moved to SIP4, which really took into account more information, more initiatives using things like JDF and JMF. But the industry moved a lot faster, you know, as than a lot of the, unfortunately, than a lot of the standards bodies. And this is something that just happened within, not just in our industry, but industries in general. And what we found was that while JDF and JMF are used in limited areas, probably APIs and XML are used more widely. And how can we, as an industry, take advantage of that and help us continue to move ourselves further in terms of optimization and automation of processes? Part of the problem is that we kind of got hung up, and it wasn't really something that we created ourselves, but things moved very fast, and we wound up creating these production silos that we need to start getting over. And when you're looking at workflows in particular, one of the first things you need to look at is, where are these production silos? How did we get there, and how can we eliminate them? So where'd they come from? It's pretty straightforward. You know, in the old days, we had a computer to plate, CTP, or CTF, or computer to film. I'm not going to go back further than that, because this is really where we started dealing with digital. And we had a controller that processed the file for that CTP device that ultimately went and created the plate that goes on the press. And then, you know, things got good. We made some money. We bought another press. Workflow didn't change much, because we still had basically the same DFE that was controlling the CTP device and processing the file, and then sending it off to the and creating the plate to put on the press. But then all of a sudden, we started putting in digital equipment, toner-based equipment, inkjet-based equipment, and we wound up with another DFE. So you now see two DFEs. And all of a sudden, these workflows don't really go together. Why don't they go together? Well, they have different DFEs, so people just assumed that if they have a different DFE, it's a different workflow. And then you bring in another piece of equipment, and all of a sudden, you've got another workflow with another silo. And then you bring in some wide format stuff for sign and display, and you have another. And you'll notice that each of these, this is really why we have the silos that we have, or you have these silos in your facilities. So the question then becomes, okay, I've got these silos. What do I do to address that? Because I'm not going to get rid of the equipment, because I know I'm going to need it. As a matter of fact, not only am I know I'm going to need it, I know that I'm probably going to be using a lot of disparate equipment from different manufacturers that are going to have different DFEs. So how do I then wrestle this all together and create a more holistic workflow? Again, going back to that diagram that I showed earlier. The first thing you need to know is the DFE is not your workflow. The digital front end is really a doorway into each of your output devices. It's not your plant workflow. Your workflow feeds the DFE. So the DFE can do many things, but it only does it basically around that device that it's connected to. So then what are you really looking at when you're looking at workflows of the future? Ultimately, you know what? It all starts with data. And there's really 4 different types of data that we look at in current, and more importantly in future types of processes and workflows. We have the production data files, which of course we're all somewhat used to. Those are the PDFs that we've been talking about, that Frank was talking about before, PDFX, production data files. We have production data instructions. In this case, it says JDF, but it could just be XML. These are basically the instructions that say, okay, so here's this file I'm sending you. This is what I want you to do with it. Right? This is how many copies I want. This is how I want you to produce it. I want you to finish it a certain way. Those were the production data instructions. Some of those instructions are what we actually even included in the processing steps that I showed you before, that we initially set up, not just for packaging, but for other types of applications, and we're continuing to work on within the Ghent Workgroup. Then you've got the business data. Okay, who gets billed and where do I ship this stuff? Right? And when do I ship it? Well, you're always going to need that, but that's separate data as well. And then if you've got a variable job, if it's a VDP job, well, then you have a stream of variable data that's actually separate and distinct as well. So you've got these 4 different data buckets, if you will, that really comprise the core of how your workflow has to be able to manage processes in the future. Not just managing the process, but managing this data as well. So how do you look at it? So if I'm going to, if I'm going to step back and say, okay, now I need to build myself a new workflow, because I do have all these silos. What I said was correct. What do I do? Well, you first start off, and when I go into a plant, first thing I do is I find a whiteboard, and I sit down with all the stakeholders. We say, okay, so let's look at it at the high level first, right? How do I look at a workflow at high level? Well, I look at, okay, I have a customer input. Well, what kind of inputs do I get? And I may have many different inputs depending on the customer. Oh, and it could be web to print. It could be an email. It could be EDI feeds. It could be a CD or DVD, God forbid. But there could be many different ways to get these types of input. And the first thing I need to do is normalize it, because if I'm going to be sending things to various devices, and all of them are digital, and all of them have those data, that data, whether it's all 4 of those buckets of data I just showed you or just some of them, how do I normalize that data so that I can then bring it down to those other devices further down the path, or in the plant? And once it's normalized, then I can check and prepare it. And in this case, I can check it. We, again, doing those validations that we talked about before, and preparation. I can now prepare that to go to any one of those variety of output devices, because now that I've kind of normalized the data coming in to a set of standards, I can now modify it as I need to for the requirements of each of the additional output devices that are there, and the finishing devices and shipping. And then again, throughout this whole thing, I've got this production management and business management sitting under there that should play a role. It doesn't have to necessarily play a role directly with each of those steps, but the chances are it will play a role within that process itself. Once you've done that, then you start digging down even further, and you get down into more complex tasks. Okay, so I have an order, I have a PDF file, I'm going into workflow system, which goes into a variety of DFEs, right? For different machine controls, whether I'm doing inkjet, flexo, this was for a packaging company, die cutting, embossing, etc. I have files for stuff that's going externally, for external services. The reason you start with the diagram before this one first, before you start with this one, is if you start with this one first, the chances are you wind up going down what I call a rabbit hole. And once you get down there, it's dark and dank, and you'll never find your way back out, and you wind up going in circles. So you always start with a higher level, then you work your way down to a more complex view of the individual tasks. And then ultimately you need to automate. Frank, I think you want to pick this one up?
But, I was just listening to you. You were talking so nice. So yeah, so you need to automate, and well, I thought this was more also about automation these days is no longer like it used to be, like a predefined set of steps. It's also no longer a linear thing where you know it will go from point O to, so it follow a fixed number of steps, but the evolution in pipeline or in automation is actually to go to rule-based workflows, where your workflow itself decides based on your production or your business data what steps to follow. So rule-based automation setup is actually the most flexible thing, and actually can also increase your productivity because you don't have to intervene or select the right workflow and things like that. So rule-based automation is actually the best solution you can get, but this is typically at the current state in your DAV. It's rule-based, but now you have to get out of this box and even include more links to other things, because you have to include your production data, you have to connect to multiple output silos, you have to get your data from your variable data, your files. So you have to connect it all into one overall production workflow, let's call it like that, which is agnostic to your devices you're going to steer, and which can talk to as many components as you need to talk to. For example, if you need to talk to your MIS ERP, can it address it through an API? Can it address it to XML? It's all of these things you have to, if you go and select a workflow tool, you have to make sure that you can reach all the components in your workflow you need to address. For example, you also might want to directly ticket to your delivery provider. So it's important that you build a workflow which can address your company flow in an agnostic manner and talk to all the components that are influenced or that make up your complete company. So typically today, open cloud-based and functional components can be used to build such a workflow and then bring everything together. Well, you might, it's always open whether your MIS equipment is the central part or you want it to be a important part, but not really the central component. So you need to have something which can talk to all your components, get the information from it, also display to your operators if needed in one single web interface, so that they don't have to go and browse around to several other systems to find the data they need. And then together with, you can build a system that works. And from a management standpoint, you typically also want to build customized reports from it to know how everything is working, where your files are, what your lead times are, what your production delay or everything like that is.
Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting, as we said, you know, PDF really did facilitate the change. You know, when we really started automating, this goes back to the late 80s, early 90s, actually more so was the early 90s, that we really started to see the big leap, and it really had to do with PDFs. PDFs are one of the reasons why what we used to call copiers are now digital presses, because we were able to actually begin to process those things. So we know it's a good format. It's a standard exchange format. It's a great container. One of the things that many people don't realize about the PDF format is that it is object oriented, which means that every one of those components within the PDF is an object. And I'm going to, in a second, talk to you just very briefly about some of the stuff that's coming down the pike around PDF, but it's reliable. We went through a lot of these. Frank went through a lot of these things. So, you know, can it work in packaging? Absolutely. But PDF is changing, and it's about time. This is a kind of a document that probably talks to many of you about what you recognize of PDF, except for perhaps the last column under development, PDFX6. So everything that we've known on PDFX today really went only as far as the PDF version that existed in 2007. And in 2008, it was that Adobe gave that to ISO, passed it off to ISO, and then it became a standard. And from that point, from 2008 till today, it's 2019, there has not been a new PDF standard. PDF 2.0 is the new standard. It is still under development, but it's just about baked. You know, if you make cakes, you know, you put the little toothpick in to see whether it's still moist inside. This one's almost dry. It's just about ready to take out of the oven. And on top of PDF 2.0 will be a PDF X6, which will be, again, the print version, if you will, or subset of PDF 2.0. And it's going to bring some very, very interesting things to PDF, which will mean more flexibility in terms of how you process and produce your files going forward. A lot of the you just look at in terms of capabilities. We're going to be adding better print job control using potentials of depart metadata and JDF. Again, using that object part of PDF that I told you about. All these PDFs have objects. Using metadata, not just for the file itself, because actually there will be tremendous use of metadata within the PDF X6 file, but actually taking it to the next level, to the component level, to the object level within PDFX. So think about if you actually were able to take a PDF file, just put this in your head. I have a PDF file, it's got a bunch of objects in it, or better yet, let's take it at the higher level. I've got a PDF file, and it's a PDFX file, and it's a book, and there's a cover, and there's a book block, and there's a flyleaf, and then there's some inserts, and all of those in the past would be separate files. What if they were all the same file, in the same file, but I was able to control how it was, that file was then ingested into a DFE further down the line to help automate the process, and look, and then take a book and make it, because now a lot of the book machines and the book production is kind of womb to tomb. It's from file in to book out on the other side. Those kinds of things are now going to begin to be possible. So there's a whole new world of automation and control that will be coming to PDF and to PDFX in your space over the next year or so. You'll start to see PDFX6 compliant devices, I'm guessing probably sometime, maybe toward the end of 2020, but you'll start hearing about them probably sooner than that, and maybe even kind of drifts and promises of it at Drupa next year. Things like processing steps, which are already being used, will become more reliably used and more regularly used. But look, at the end of the day, eBusiness is the future. And that when we talk about workflows, it really is. It's about eBusiness. It's facilitating business between the buyer and the seller. People are used to it. They go to Amazon, you click on a button, you get what you want. I go and I want something printed. I can go, whether it's Cloud Printer or anything else. I just go to my application. I click on out of InDesign or out of Acrobat or whatever, and out of my iPhoto, and I can get a book printed. More of that is going to happen, and the way that that's going to happen, it's going to happen faster, and it's going to happen more reliably, is through the use of eBusiness and the interchange of data, not just production data, but process data, et cetera. So we need to be able to coordinate all this, and it's going to all happen as a result of standardized structures. And the cloud is going to become a very big part of that, and it's helping to facilitate it. So with that, stay informed. If you haven't been to the GWG website or subscribed to any of our newsletters, you really should. It's free. We have amazing white papers with a tremendous amount of information. We have additional webinars, and we're obviously very socially informed and invited. So we're in Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. We'd love to have you join and be part of the process. We meet 3 times a year in person, and the rest of the year we have meetings and communicate through mail links, etc., and actually develop these a lot of what we talked about today. You can join, you can be part of it, not just, you can just go to the website and take what you want, or you can be part of creating some of these solutions that I was talking about. Because as I said, we're at the beginning of a cusp, a whole new reality coming, and now's the time to really become and get involved. Our next meeting is actually only in a couple of weeks. It's going to be in Sofia, Bulgaria. The next meeting after that is outside of Marseille in France. And then the next meeting after that, I believe, is either in Ghent or in, I'm not even sure. You'll have to go to the website to find out. You can just join a subcommittee, become a member. If you have questions, gwg.org. As I said, go to the website, go to any of the social media areas, leave the questions, and we're happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much for attending today. We hope that we were able to answer a lot of what you had. And as I said, if you've got more questions, feel free to just drop us a note. Thank you very much.
Thank you.